John Ourand from the Sports Business Journal. He joins us now as the repercussions of COVID-19 wreaks havoc on the sports world. But we'll see what the plans are and what could happen down the road. John, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
As good as we could be, I guess. Hopefully you're staying safe, and we know it's an odd time. And one thing that I feel that is interesting, how long do you feel that these networks can get by playing old games? Is that like plan A, or are they scrambling right now, throwing old games on and figuring out what to do next?
I think they're throwing old games on right now and figuring out what to do next. The problem is that, you know, there used to be a channel that had nothing but old games, ESPN Classic, and you know that's no longer a channel that's in every single home because they couldn't get people to come and watch the games. The audiences for those old games are really, really small. And then secondly, they don't own a lot of the rights for those old games. So the NFL, you can go to NFL Network and watch a lot of those old NFL games because the NFL owns all the rights to them. The NBA owns all the rights to the NBA games. So they would have to sort of negotiate with some of these leagues, which I think would be an easy negotiation now because, you know, they don't have the NBA's live games. But I think that, like, if you're ESPN or if you're Fox Sports 1, you're really looking at these sort of programming stunts, more highlight shows, like who are the best 100 NFL players is probably something you're going to end up seeing. A lot more of these sort of old, instead of the old games, old highlight rights that you can show. So here are the 10 most consequential catches in NFL history or something along those lines. And they'll be able to move forward like that.
John, Kirk Herbstreit said something that probably scared the death out of people today. That he doesn't think college football, he doesn't think college or NFL football will be ready to start on time. He'd be stunned. What happens in that case? I mean, you got contracts, you've got all sorts of things, but what would happen to the sports world? It's managing right now, but what would happen if the NFL and college football were unable to kick off come September?
You know what? I'm going to actually answer a different question before I answer that. I mean, let's say the NFL kicks off in September or October, and then you have the NFL going against NBA playoffs, going against MLB playoffs, going against all these golf majors. All of a sudden, you're going to have so many sports in October and November. There's just going to be a glut of them, and then you almost don't have enough TV networks to show them. You don't have enough advertisers to come in to support them. So that, like, the best case scenario is almost a disaster for media companies right now. If the NFL doesn't kick off, Disney and ESPN are going to be fine if they don't have any games for a year or so. I think I think that it's built in. A lot of their contract deals with, cable systems are built in to go longer than a year. So they can find different things. They got nearly 1 million people to watch a replay of the of WrestleMania from several years ago, last Sunday. NASCAR, I think it was it Fox or NBC? One of them did a video. They just showed a video of a NASCAR race, a video game. And they got nearly 1 million people to watch that. So they can still bring some audiences in. They can still find some sort of programming. But even a best-case scenario for this fall is not going to be a good scenario for any of the leagues or any of the networks.
John, is there any chance, or how much does this idea make sense, of just everything being pushed back? So if the NFL can't start in September, I would imagine the NBA isn't up and running before that point. So if the NBA starts July, they end in October, November, can the NFL pick up right after that? Like, what makes the most sense from what you've researched and gathered here for all of the leagues to get back up and running or still have a full season if it's not impacting their season at the moment?
I think right now, right now nobody knows, and everybody's trying to check. Nobody knows if, can you have an NBA season where you have teams where players are quarantined and tested and they play in small arenas with no fans? Is that possible that you could do that? Then they could possibly start that maybe in June. But then what do you do in a city like New York, which is like a ground zero right now? Like, there are a lot of questions about that. But right now, the French Open decided that they're going to. They just said we're going to move. I forget what the date is, but they're going to move the French Open to some date in October, and it really caught the networks and the U.S. sports leagues by surprise, because here the leagues and the networks and everybody are sort of working together to try to come up with the best schedule for everything, and you aren't seeing leagues in the United States sort of giving a date. They're not going to give a date. The NBA isn't going to give a date for when it's going to start the schedule until they talk to Turner and ESPN and make sure that it's because they need eyeballs, they need people watching, and they just want to make sure that they operate and they play in an environment where they get the most people watching.
John Ourand from the Sports Business Journal. Interesting time. So, the casual fan or the fan in general says there's too many games anyway. Like baseball shouldn't play 162. They need to cut back. Basketball, there's no need for 82 games. Is this the precursor for potentially shortening seasons, or will that never happen?
As a fan, I hope so. Don't you? I think that I think it could be. I do know this that leagues and teams, especially like NBA teams, like having 82 games because that's 82 games of revenue that they're able to get. So if they all of a sudden get, let's say they make it a 60-game season, they're going to be out 18 or 22 games. Sorry, my math is not good. Of actual revenue. Networks, they like having that many games. It's content that they're able to get on to get on their air. So from all the different sort of money angles, they'd rather have more games than less. The only potential hiccup on that is they all look at the NFL, which is by far the biggest, most popular league. It gets the biggest ratings, gets the most revenue, and they only have right now 16 games, one a week. And so does scarcity help to improve the value of everything around it? It's going to be really hard to convince NBA owners that they should give up, millions in revenue off each game with the promise of maybe scarcity bringing more revenue in. That's a tough conversation to have.
Now,
John,
John,
how could you
mentioned, John, that Disney and ESPN can probably last, but what about like locally? We're in the Philly area, NBC Philadelphia, which has Sixers, Flyers, and Phillies games not airing right now. How long can someone like these regional networks, how long can they hold on with nothing?
Well, luckily, NBC Sports Philly as Comcast as a corporate parent, which is deep pockets, and everybody's at home using Comcast Wi-Fi, and Comcast broadband. So I think an NBC Sports Philly has the potential to last longer than a lot of others. But if there are a bunch of ifs, because like the answer to every question is pretty much nobody knows. But if this leads to a recession, if the recession lasts for a long time, I cover sports media for a sports magazine, and I have monthly conversations with my wife that wants to give up cable because it costs too much, and I'm the only one that watches it because I'm down in D.C. watching the local RSNs down here. So I think that the RSNs in particular, the regional sports networks, they're the most expensive channels on cable systems, and if people start to have to tighten their belts and end up cutting the cord and not subscribing to cable anymore, that there's a big problem there. I mean, that's one of the big issues that I'm looking at through this whole outbreak here.
John, another potential issue is advertising, and there's billions and millions of dollars here tied up in sports advertising. How could this change that landscape moving forward? I mean, I joked that maybe instead of the seventh inning stretch, I saw actually in one of the Sports Business Journals, they make it the seventh inning Lysol wipe your seat.
I'm surprised they haven't done that already. I'm sure they've tried at some point or another. The crazy thing about this is that 2 weeks ago I was writing stories about about how great the ad market was and how the NCAA tournament sold out months ahead of time. Fox had the Super Bowl this year. They sold the Super Bowl out in November, the earliest ever. The ad market going into this outbreak was as healthy as I've been covering this for decades. It was as healthy as any ad market I've ever seen in sports TV. And so the big questions. So there's no real answer to that. But the big questions looking forward is like if the recession takes hold, how long the recession lasts for, and whether or not these companies want to spend through it. But because there are no games right now, all of a sudden all of the ad commitments for right now they're going to the fall. So the networks aren't able to really make any new sales off the fall. And there's just going to be this big log jam when there's going to be a lot of pain in sports and sports media.
Hey, John, how does this impact the NFL's upcoming contracts, right? That's something that's on the horizon. You see CBS giving $17 million to Tony Romo with the hope that there's going to be football games and that he's going to be calling them. But how does this change the landscape of the negotiations for these things?
And I don't think CBS has a pandemic clause in that contract for Tony Romo. That was one of the first questions that I had, and I actually talked to a bunch of different people last week. They're still moving forward with it. Networks, even though there's been such a big stock drop, networks still want the NFL. The NFL brings in the biggest audience. It brings in the best audience. It's like, young fans. It brings in a lot of female fans. And it's, if you're going to be in television, you need the NFL. And the networks know that. The NFL knows that. And there's no sense of punting this by a year and letting everything shake out. The networks know they want the NFL, and those are negotiations I'm told that are going to be happening, early within the next probably 3 months or so, regardless of what's going on right now.
Does this affect, say, one of the things, if you're into the sports media and sports business stuff, you saw what's going on with Romo, and now ESPN, everybody's complaining about the Monday night booth, and they're going to try to find somebody. I mean, does this buy time for Booger McFarland and Joe Tessitore that becomes minimal on the importance scale because of all this?
It seems minimal on the importance scale, but from everything I've been told, Booger McFarland almost certainly is not going to return. That they're going to have a role for him, maybe in the studio. Joe Tess as somebody that's a little bit different. I think he has a lot of supporters at ESPN. He has a lot of people that like him personally, and that he was one of their best college football play-by-play men that they had. So they don't think that he got any worse, but he might have to just try to adapt a little bit more to the NFL. So there's a good chance that Joe Tess might come back, but it's not looking like Booger McFarland's going to come back into the booth.
John, what about the ticket aspect of the sports industry? That's something that we've talked a lot about throughout the week here. $1 billion in ticket sales are potentially held up right now because on the tickets and StubHub and other third-party companies of that nature, the policy is if a game is delayed or postponed, you're not getting a refund. You can't really even sell those tickets. And in these trying times, that rule could potentially be argued to be adjusted or uplifted. How are you looking at that aspect?
Right now, that's nothing that I've actually looked into in total, but I can tell you that one of the big fears that they have, especially going into the fall or early next year, is that we're right now being conditioned to not get together with more than 10 people or more than a handful of people, and the idea of sitting in like a snowy Lambeau Field with like 80,000 crazy fans right in the middle of flu season is something that it will be interesting to see if that's something that fans still are willing to do, or if all of a sudden, you're going to see big attendance hits because people don't want to go to I use Lambeau Field, which is outside. Let's just use a basketball, a stadium, and that people don't want to go to like a sweaty gym with a ton of people in the middle of like flu season. That nobody knows how that's gonna work out, but that's certainly one of the fears that teams and leagues have right now.
John Ourand from the Sports Business Journal. It is excellent stuff. If you're into all that's going on in the world right now, you should definitely give him a follow. Ourand_SBJ on Twitter. And I guess we'll leave with this. Some of these owners, I mean, you got Mark Cuban saying, hey, we hope to be back by mid-May and, over under June. I mean, does that sound aggressive to you? Like that basketball and or baseball or any sport is playing games and the realistic possibility of playing without fans and how, like, they're not making money without fans being in there. I guess they got some TV money coming in, but like, does it just sound a little aggressive to say, hey, over under June?
Yeah, I think that's aspirational as opposed to factual. I think that they're hoping that happens. I mean, when almost as soon as the NBA suspended its season, Adam Silver came out and said it was going to be 30 days. And then I think it was probably like 2 or 3 days later, that was up to 60 days. I think right now, nobody knows. Nobody knows how far, whether this is going to ebb, whether it's going to recede. Nobody knows how this outbreak is going to progress. And so, even you mentioned Herbstreit earlier, like people have opinions, but nobody has any knowledge, and it's there's really nothing more to say to that. But before I go, I love coming on in Philly because my son is a junior at Temple who is now studying Temple out of D.C. He's home with me here, so quick shout out to the Owls.
There you go. Well, I listen to you often on many sports media podcasts. I always am intrigued by the conversations you and Richard and you and Jimmy have on those sports media podcasts. So we do enjoy it. And, John, we appreciate you coming on the show.
I love talking about this stuff. Thanks for having me.